is about King Mahmud of Bukhara. And oftentimes in the evening, King would leave his palace in the garb of a poor traveller, and he would wander the streets of his city to see how his citizens were faring. One evening, he entered the city, and it was just coming down to dusk, and the marketplace was still busy, so there were many people in the squares. But as he walked down the street and the sun went down and became dark, he came to the poor part of the town. And after wandering for some time, because it was a very hot and sultry night, he was thirsty and a little tired. And looking down the road, he saw a house, a small hut, a very simple house. And as he approached, he saw the candles in the window, 2 candles sitting on the table, but the light that was coming from the house seemed to be brighter than just what 2 candles could give. And as he approached, he heard the sound of singing, a voice chanting the words of devotion to God. And as he came close and looked in the window, there was an old man sitting at the table, and he would sip a little arak, and then he would sing again a song of praise to the Lord. So the king went to the door, and he knocked on the door. And when the door was opened, he said to the old man, I'm a poor traveller on the road. Would you offer me hospitality? And the old man ushered him into the house and sat him down at the table and said, "You're very welcome to the simple meal that we have. Please, please, please." So, after an evening of conversation, the king asked the old man, "What is your occupation?" And the old man said, "Every day I go to the town and I mend shoes for those who have need, and I earn enough to keep my wife and myself in food and simple living." "Oh," said the king, "but what about when you grow old? I don't see any children around you to take care of you in your old age." And the old man said, "Someone will take care of." "Oh," said the king, "who would that be? Do you have relatives?" "No," said the old man, "I have my faith and trust in the Lord." So the king took his leave of the old man and his wife, and he said, "May I come and visit you again?" "Yes, you're welcome at any time," said the old man. But as the king was returning to his palace, he had a thought. "I'm going to test this old man's faith." So the very next day, King Mahmud made an edict, and a town crier went out into the streets of the town to announce that no one was allowed to mend shoes in the town again. So suddenly, the old man found himself without a livelihood. How would he put food on the table for his wife and himself? Just then, he noticed a man carrying buckets of water. And he thought to himself, yes, I can become a water carrier. And this is what he did. He carried water from the stream, and he brought it into the town, and he sold it to the people. So he was able to make a few coins to put food on the table for himself and his wife. But that very night, King Mahmud visited him again. And he said to the old man, "Well, how did you fare now that the king has made this law that no one can mend shoes in the town?" "Oh," said the old man, "I've become a water carrier. I carry water to the people." "Ah," said the king. And after spending a pleasant evening with the old man and his wife, the king went back to his palace. And the very next day, he sent a town crier out to say no one was allowed to sell water in the streets of the town. Everyone must gather their own water. So when the old man went out to carry his buckets of water to sell, it was not permitted in the town. What would he do? Just then, a small group of woodcutters went by, making their way out into the forest where they'd chop wood. And he thought to himself, "I can become a woodcutter." So, getting himself an axe, he went off with the woodcutters to the forest to gather wood, which was sold in the marketplace again. And again, the king visited him and asked him how he was faring now that it was not permitted for anyone to carry water. The old man said, "I've become a woodcutter." The next day, the king sent out a messenger to bring all the woodcutters to his palace, where they would be made into sentries and guards around his palace gates. So the next day, when the old man went out to join the small group that were going off to the forest to chop wood, they found themselves rounded up by the sentries of the king and taken to the palace and given a uniform and a sword and made to stand outside the palace gates, guarding the gates. Well, the old man found that even though he had a uniform and a sword, that soldiers and sentries of the king were only paid once a month, and the month was just beginning. So he had no money to buy food to put on the table for his wife and himself. But that evening, when he was sitting at home with his wife, he had a thought. He took down his whittling knife and a piece of wood, and he began to whittle. And as he whittled, he made a sword, just like the bright, shining sword that was in his sheath that had been given to him by the king's guards. And when the sword was finished, he replaced the bright, shining steel sword with the wooden sword in its sheath, and then he went out and sold the sword. He had enough money to put food on the table for himself and his wife for the whole month. But the king came again and asked him how he was faring. And the old man told him the story. "Well, what are you going to do?" said the king. And the old man related what he'd done, that he'd made a wooden sword. "Ah, but what about if the king finds out about this?" said the king, murmured in disguise. "Ah," said the old man, "I do not take care of things that have not yet occurred. That is the Lord's business. He will take care of this." Several days later, the king sent out his messengers to gather everyone on to the town square because an execution was to take place. Someone who, it was said, had stolen a melon from his orchard was going to be beheaded. So, of course, all the people of the town had to gather around the execution stand. But as the accused man was stood on the dais, the king himself pointed to the old man who was standing in his soldier's uniform to be the one to come up and behead the accused being. When the messenger came down to take him up to fulfill this task, the old man said, "But please, please, I've never killed anyone in my life. I cannot do this." "Ah," said the guard messenger, "if you do not, your own head will roll." So the old man made his way up to the execution stand. And then he turned to the king and to all those who were present and said, "Please, would you allow me to pray before I undertake this task?" So silently he prayed for a few moments, and then turning to the king and the crowd, he said, "O Lord, you know that I have never killed anyone in my entire life. Please, Lord, if this man is guilty, may I slice his head so that it is quick and painless for him. But if he is innocent, may my sword be turned to wood." And then he drew the sword out of his sheath and held it above his head, and the crowd cheered. King Mahmud called the old man over to him and said, "Look at me. Do you know who I am?" And the old man looked, and he said, Why, you're the poor traveler who has been visiting me these past evenings." King Mahmud looked at the old man and said, "You have proven yourself to be a man of great faith and wisdom. Come to my palace. Be with my advisor. Remain with me." And so it was. The old man and his wife became advisors to King Mahmud. The second story is a Taoist story. Taoist story about a man well known for his stories, called Lin. He was a student of the great sage who wrote the I Ching, Lao Tzu. Now Lao Tzu at that time lived in a village, a small village, and Li Tzu remained with him as his student and had been his student for some years. But on a hill, not far from the village, there lived a sorcerer, well known in the town, because he would come down from the hill wearing a belt of the skulls of animals, a tiger skin around his neck, bells around his throat and hanging down. He had black, piercing eyes, and he would walk through the town, calling, "Come, come, let me tell you when you will die. I will also tell you your fate." Oftentimes, people would run into their houses when they saw this strange and fierce being. But Li Tzu was a curious man. So one day he went to his master Lao Tzu, and he said, "Master, I hear of a sorcerer who lives in a hill nearby. He is said to know many, many things. May I have permission to go to him?" "Go, go, go," said Lao Tzu, "go, go." So Li Tzu set out for the abode of the sorcerer. When he climbed the hill, he could smell the strange smells coming from the hut in which the sorcerer lived. But when he arrived there, the sorcerer invited him in, and when he came inside, there was smoke eddying all around, strange sounds coming from the corners. But Li Tzu sat and waited. And when he waited, the sorcerer began motion around the fire. He would throw dust and colors would arise. And then he would make strange sounds, the sounds of animals. And the day passed. Li Tzu waited. And then suddenly, the sorcerer made the sound of a mountain lion. Now Li Tzu had a very bad encounter with a mountain lion when he'd been a shepherd looking after the sheep many years before. So the one terror, the one fear of his life was mountain lions. So when the sound of the mountain lion came out of the sorcerer, Li Tzu became greatly afraid, and he was almost ready to jump up and run out. But something kept him transfixed. And finally, the sorcerer ceased his movements around the fire. The sounds that emanated from him became quiet, and it was time for Li Tzu to take his leave. So he went back to his master, Lao Tzu, to relate what it was that had happened. Lao Tzu said to Li Tzu, "Ask the sorcerer to visit me tomorrow." So the next day, Li Tzu went back to the hillside, and he asked the sorcerer, would he come down to visit his master, Lao Tzu. Somewhat reluctantly, the sorcerer agreed. But when he came down, and Li Tzu ushered him in to the abode of Lao Tzu, Lao Tzu told Li Tzu to wait outside. He was not allowed to join the sorcerer and himself inside. So Li Tzu waited outside the door, anxiously wondering what was happening inside. But after some time, the sorcerer came strutting out, and he said to Li Tzu, "Oh, your master is dying. He'll be dead within the week. and he went marching off up the hill. Li Tzu went into his master Lao Tzu, and he started to cry, "Oh, master, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that you were going to die." "Don't be stupid," said Lao Tzu. "When he entered, I withdrew my life force. So the sorcerer thought that I am dying. Let him come back tomorrow." So the next day, Li Tzu went up the mountain again and invited the sorcerer to come down again to visit his master Lao Tzu. Again, reluctantly, the sorcerer came down, and again Li Tzu was kept outside the door. And after some time, the sorcerer came strutting out, and he said to Li Tzu, "Oh, your master is cured. You owe me 10 chickens." And off he went up the mountain. And when Li Tzu went in to Lao Tzu and asked him what had occurred, Lao Tzu said, "I merely released my life force, so he believed that I was again returning to health. Let him come again tomorrow." So again, the same thing transpired. Li Tzu went to the sorcerer, who again was reluctant to come. But, repeating what had happened the days before, Li Tzu was kept outside, and the sorcerer went in to spend time with Lao Tzu. When he walked out, he said nothing to Li Tzu, and he was about to walk off up the mountain. Li Tzu said, What happened? What happened?" The sorcerer, somewhat surly, said, "Today I can't read him. I don't know what's going on with him." And he went off up the hill. And when Li Tzu went in to Lao Tzu and asked what had transpired, Lao Tzu said, "I merely brought my yin and my yang into balance. And when yin and yang are in balance, it is not to be seen. Balance is such. Let him come again." The next day, when Li Tzu went to the sorcerer did not want to return. But after some coercion, he followed Li Tzu down the hill. And again Li Tzu was left outside, and the sorcerer entered. After a very short while, the sorcerer burst out of the door and went running up the hill, and Li Tzu chased him. "What happened? What happened? What happened?" But he said nothing. He merely kept running. And when Li Tzu entered Lao Tzu's abode and asked his master what had happened, Lao Tzu said, "I withdrew into the void. I ceased my breath. I withdrew my chi into the emptiness." And he was afraid. He will not return again. Third and final story is again in China. A favorite story of Garita. In a small village, the roadside stalls were set up. The noodle seller, the tofu seller, and into this place there entered a woman dressed in rags, straw sandals on her feet, hardly held together by a piece of string, her clothes tattered, her hair long and matted, gaunt, hollow-eyed. She approached the noodle seller and asked for a bowl of noodles. The noodle seller said, "What will you pay me?" And she said, "I will pay you with my song." "Ha!" he said, "Song? How can I feed my children on a song? Go, 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 go away." But there were a number of people at the stall eating their bowls of noodles, and they said to the stallholder, "Please, we haven't heard a song since Thanksgiving time. Let her sing. Give her a bowl of noodles." Very reluctantly, the stallholder made a small bowl of soup with noodles and handed it to her, and she drank it hungry and put the bowl out for more. Again he filled it, and again she drank and ate. A third time she handed her bowl, and the bowl was filled. After she had drunk her soup, she began to sing. Her song rose up to the top of the canvas that covered the stall. The birds came down to listen, and her song seemed to seep down the streets of the town and enter into the houses, swirl around the marketplace, around the trees, through the grass. Everyone who was standing there, even the stallholder, were uplifted by this sound, which seemed to rise up to the very heavens. Everyone tasted the sweetness on their lips, like a nectar entering into their very beings. And then she left. She was not seen in this town again. But some time later, after winter had fallen and snow was on the ground, there was a knock on the door of an inn. And when it was opened, there she was, still dressed in her rags, her straw sandals, now worn, so that she was almost barefoot. She asked for warmth, and a bowl of soup. And the innkeeper took a stick and beat her and sent her away. She stood in the middle of the snow and sang, and her song was like an elegy. It crept under the door of the inn, and even though there was a fire blazing in the fireplace, everyone shivered and shuddered, as though a cold chill had entered their very bones. The sound of her song passed down the streets and in the windows and in the cracks in the doorways of the houses. And children ran under their mothers' skirts to hide. And old people who were almost ready to leave this world prayed that they might go now. And those who were on the brink of suicide went to find a means to end their sad life. Not just the cold and the snow, but a pall of sadness and sorrow covered the whole town. She left. The song became silent, but the sadness remained until the people in the inn pleaded with the innkeeper. Find her, what's happening to our town? It's dying. So the innkeeper and several of his patrons went out into the snow to try to find the woman. They searched and searched until finally, deep in the forest nearby, they found her, almost frozen under a tree. So they carried her back to the inn. They warmed her feet by the fire. They covered her with blankets and put a bowl of hot soup to her lips. After some time, she warmed. And when she warmed, she began to sing. And again her song rose up to the ceiling of the inn. The birds came down out of the rafters to listen. Her song meandered out under the doorways, down through the streets, and entered the houses through their windows, through the sills, through the cracks. And warmth, like blessing, seemed to permeate into every heart of every being. Her song could be heard in every place of that town. After she departed, the people of that town could sing. Their hearts had been awakened to song, and they never, ever, ever forgot the song that had been awoken in them. And they passed that song down to their children, and their children from their children's children, and so on. the song we